Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to profile all the shortlisted titles and hear from two sets of judges about the two categories of the prize, one for UK-based nature and travel writing and the second inaugural prize in 2020 for writing on global conservation.
Hello, I'm Craig Bennett, and it's been my real privilege to be one of the judges on the Wainwright Prize this year, and particularly in the new category on writing on global conservation. And each of the judges, ahead of the big announcement as to who's won, has been asked to talk about a couple of the books that were shortlisted. And I've been asked to talk about Irreplaceable by Julian Hoffman. This is a beautiful book, a really wonderful book, beautifully written. What I love is it particularly takes head on the importance of our wild places in terms of cultural and spiritual importance and their importance for local people emotionally, rather than feel it's got to try and argue their importance in purely utilitarian terms. And I think we've needed a book like that for quite a while that really takes that head on, just how important these wild places are. There's superb examples in there from the UK, like looking at Cliff and Thames marshes, and indeed Lodge Hill, which was that site that was a Ministry of Defence site and wasn't on the books, wasn't on the official radar as being particularly important for biodiversity until breeding nightingales were found to be there. But there's also examples from around the world, and what he does beautifully is how he talks about the UK examples, always through a local lens, but puts them into that UK and international context as well, and brings them in examples from many other countries as well. There's a huge amount of research that's clearly gone into this book over many, many years visiting these places. But what I particularly love about this book is how he tells the story of these places with the local people as his guide, very much seeing it through the eyes of these extraordinary ordinary people that live in and around these wild places, people that perhaps didn't consider themselves experts or campaigners, but became so in their desire to campaign for and to protect these very special wild places. I love this book, and whether it wins or not, I really encourage you to check it out. It's an amazing book, Irreplaceable by Julian Hoffman.
Well, I love this book, Life Changing by Helen Pilcher. It's a hugely enjoyable read, and it's in the best traditions of science writing. That's to say, it makes accessible some quite complicated and novel ideas, at least they were novel for me. And fundamentally it tells the story about how humans have altered nature. Not so much about the awful destruction of the natural world, although there's a fair amount about that in the book, but much more about how we have altered it, nature that is, to serve our needs, and in particular how the Anthropocene is not only about extinction, it's also about humanity's large-scale altering of the DNA of living things. And to tell that story, she takes us over 40,000 years, beginning with the genetically modification of wolves that led to dogs, and she speculates about whether that happened through a small boy finding a wolf puppy and bringing it home to the fire, to the camp, or whether a hungry wolf came and sat at the edge of the fire. But one way or another, the wolf became part of our life in the form of dogs. And from that story on, she discusses selective breeding of crops and livestock, experimental breeding between species, AI, in this case meaning artificial insemination, cloning, DNA manipulation, all along the line to today's industrialized farming, where 70 billion farm animals live essentially in factories to serve our needs. But much as we're set apart from the natural world, Pilcher reminds us we are nonetheless governed by its laws. Her text is witty, she has a great ear for puns, and is very informative. I learnt a lot from reading her book. I commend it as a brilliant way to learn about how humanity has manipulated so much of the rest of the natural world. This book, Rebirding by Ben McDonald, I think is absolutely brilliant. His book contains some very powerful messages that should change the way we look after the land of much of Britain. It's written with an informed passion. For example, the way MacDonald explains the miracle of bird migration with the latest science, well, it's completely gripping. And completely new to me at any rate. But much of the book tells the long, sad tale about how Britain has lost so much of its wildlife heritage, told mainly, but not exclusively, through the story of birds, and contrast our nature-poor environment with that to be found in many parts of Europe, particularly in Eastern and Central Europe, where land has not been used so intensively in the past. And this is not just a plea for a romantic vision of the past, but an argument that it makes sound economic sense to rewild these areas, because nature-based tourism creates jobs, creates income on a far wider basis than the current land uses of deer and grouse shooting, for example. So it's a plea to manage our land less intensively, to use it for nature more, let nature thrive in the spaces we make. The big messages are surely this: we need to think anew about how we use our land. We can bring back nature if we act at a big scale. We need to lose our obsession with tidiness, and nature conservation makes good economic sense. I think that Rebirding is a powerful book for our times.
Zootopia, authored by Caroline Steele, is one of the shortlisted books for the Wainwright Prize for Global Conservation. It's a really thoughtful and fascinating insight to how and what we do to balance the growing global population with also the planet's resources that we have available. I found the book really staggering. Some of the stats: 19 million hectares of rainforest are lost every year to arable land, and a third of our grain is produced to feed animals, and as we're eating more meat and dairy. It really made me think about the interconnectedness of food with environmental challenges. So our love of food hides the cost of pollution, ecological destruction, poverty and obesity. Maybe we do need to put more value on food. What I really liked about the book was how it describes our relationship with food, or zootopia, the Greek for food and place, and how it shapes everything from our bodies, our home, our society, nature, time and much more. The book seeks to show that food is the most powerful medium available to us to move to a better system, and how food can encourage people to act together to change the world. A really passionate, considered account, really beautifully written, of how a zoetopian contract can help us revalue food and also restructure our lives around it. Well done. What We Do Now is written by Chris Goodall and is one of the shortlisted books for the Wainwright Prize for Global Nature Conservation. This book really sets out the actions we need to take to achieve net zero by 2050. Following on from the government's legally binding commitment, it is certainly well timed. The book explains what net zero carbon is, why it's important, but it also provides some areas which are on the to-do list for the UK to achieve its target. For me, it sets out some really key areas of action for both reduction and offsetting. The reduction proposals from green energy, hydrogen in the grid, local ownership of energy, the built environment, which focuses on the fabric of buildings and concrete production, sustainable transport and fashion, and many more. It looks at the role of both government, business and individuals, with the recognition that everyone has a part to play. Collective action is going to be key. The author also looks at the role of carbon taxation as a medium for paying for the changes that are needed, and also the role of offsetting and reforestation. This is a really interesting and thought-provoking chapter on the role of the individual and what we can do ourselves. It's a practical and succinct toolkit which anyone from business to individuals can read to think through the actions we need to take to achieve our 2050 target. A really informative book, and well done.
Hello, I'm Craig Bennett, and it's been my real privilege to be one of the judges on the Wainwright Prize this year, particularly for the category of writing on global conservation. And ahead of the big announcement, each of the judges has been asked to talk about a couple of the books that were on the shortlist this year, and I'm going to be talking about Working with Nature by Jeremy Pursglove. This is a fascinating book where Jeremy talks us through many of the places he's visited in his lifetime career of working to protect nature, and examples from here in the UK. I particularly loved a chapter on Thorn and Hatfield moors, those amazing lowland raised peat bogs in South Yorkshire that were being destroyed for peat extraction, and now finally we're starting to see peat restoration at those incredibly important sites. But also examples from the rainforest in South America and in Indonesia, and examples from the Caribbean and from Central Asia, looking at the impact that cotton growing, for example, has had on water supplies and wetlands in Central Asia. It's a fascinating book with a huge amount of information in it, and all the time he's kind of telling the story about his working with local communities and companies around the world on trying to protect these sites and these environments. And he has a huge amount of experience to draw on there, and he takes the reader through that experience to really offer his view as to how we need to solve these problems in the future by working with nature. So I would recommend you to check out this book. It's a really lovely book, very interesting to read. I've enjoyed it immensely, and really grateful for Jeremy for sharing his stories.